Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. Russia's continuing invasion of Ukraine delivers geopolitical shockwaves, including on Canada's Arctic borders. Here to discuss this and other threats is Alex Dalziel. He is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, an Ottawa-based think tank. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tony. It's great to be here.
So I guess the first question is, can you tell us about the latest Russian moves in the Arctic region?
Well, since the invasion, the full-scale invasion into Ukraine in 2022, February 2022, we've seen largely a series of effects on the geopolitical situation in the Arctic. So Russia, I should say as a preface, until even after 2014 and the initial invasion of Ukraine, there had been an attempt to kind of cordon off the Arctic region and keep cooperation amongst the 8 countries that have territory in the Arctic, and especially amongst the 5 who have coasts on the Arctic Ocean in a more cooperative frame. And so, unfortunately, this framework is largely is in disrepair because of Russia's full-scale aggression in Ukraine. So we've seen a number of things happening in the geopolitical and geoeconomic realm that primarily have to do with Russia's attempt to compensate for its losses in terms of market access and political engagement with not just the other Arctic countries, but the European Union, forcing it to rely more on China and countries external to the region, as well as the changes that have occurred in NATO with Sweden and Finland joining, and a greater awareness in the United States of America about the opening of a more geopolitical strategic rivalry situation in the Arctic.
Yeah, so are we talking here military, economic, or both?
We're talking both. I think we're thinking across the board here. Militarily, Russia, because of the pressures in Ukraine and the fact that the Ukrainians have chosen to fight back, has really had to deplete quite a bit of its troops, particularly land troops that were based in the Arctic. So this has put new pressure on its navy, in particular, to project Russian interests. It's really key to keep in mind that what Russia is doing, Russia's really in a weaker position militarily in many respects when it comes to dealing with NATO and in the north. What we've seen rhetorically, however, and this should be taken quite seriously, is that the Russians have upped the ante in terms of how they're speaking about resource exploitation, their access to the continental shelf in the Arctic Ocean, and are taking a lot more risks in the development of what's called the Northern Sea route. So this is we have the Northwest Passage that cuts across the top through our Arctic chain of islands. They have what's called the Northern Sea route that goes all the way from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So as you'd be aware, even though with climate change, these are becoming more open, they're still very difficult navigational places. And what we've seen from the Russians is an increasing willingness to take risks in terms of the types of ships that are going through there, the cargoes they carry, and how they are escorted and what season, the sailing season, trying to extend that. So it's both, this is really, again, when you're thinking about the geopolitical and the strategic rivalry piece, Russia has done a lot over the last couple of decades to shore up its military position.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with Air Force and Navy. But the Ukrainian situation has really forced them to flex. So perhaps we're seeing a little bit more of an orientation to selling a vision to non-Arctic countries of the economic potential of the Russian North.
We've got about 35 seconds before the break, but one of the things you've noted in an article I read, authored by you, is that this is actually part of their planning policies in the Russian government.
Absolutely. I mean, their strategic documents have increasingly raised the importance of the Arctic and how they're discussing about it, expanding the scope of national security to contain more of what might be seen as economic security or even social economic policy, and a very clear statement that they plan to exercise whatever jurisdictions they can gain under international law or perhaps outside of it in the Arctic Ocean.
We're going to come back to that topic with our guest after this break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.